Nominate the youth sports volunteer that you know for the Hercules Hero of the Week. Submit your nomination at KSLSports.com/contest and listen every Thursday afternoon to JJ and Alex for the winner. Help us celebrate the efforts of those volunteers making an impact with the Hercules Hero of the Week. And it's sponsored by Hercules Credit Union and Beehive Meals. And Beehive Meals will be in here soon to tell us about their product for sure. Band of the day with Led Zeppelin. I was watching an interview a while back with Dan Rather and Robert Plant, who you said was 76 today. And Rather says, oh, man, in the 60s, you were known as a band for your debauchery and your mischief and your misbehavior, and no one did it to the level and extent that you did. And Robert Plant says, oh, thank you. That's kind of you to say that. Thinking, wasn't the answer I thought was coming.
Well, I heard some stuff about fill in the name of band here.
Yeah.
Maybe we were second.
So he took it as a compliment for all the debauchery that they had. And yet here he is at 76, still going.
DJ and PK, it's 97.5 The Zone. We are joined now by David Nixon. Former BYU linebacker will join us briefly.
Well, good morning, David. How are you? From one David to another. The brother-in-law of Taysom Hill.
There it is.
A man who can crush a golf ball 340 yards. I've seen it with my own eyes. Yes.
And landed in the fairway?
I couldn't see that far.
You couldn't see that far, so you have no idea. Might have caught the edge of the rough. We'll know when we get up there.
Had an opportunity to whack the golf ball a little bit with him a while back. One of your better players for BYU when they have a linebacker factory going on and you list the number of great linebackers, he's on that list. And it's interesting that they've had that. I wonder if you can't really say it because it doesn't make any sense.
Go ahead, try it.
But the Latter-day Saints have produced some good players at certain positions, and they've done it repeatedly. Now, it makes no sense. Mormons don't have some DNA on linebackers. But they've had a number of linebackers, and they happen to be LDS, and they're really good. Elaine Michaelis years ago told me we should always be good in volleyball. Always. Speaking of women's volleyball. We always have a factory of LDS young ladies who are really good at volleyball. Why is that? That doesn't make any sense to me. But yet, and she was there for 50 years.
And had a bunch of good teams, and she left, and they still have a bunch of good teams. Right. If you look up and BYU's in the Sweet 16 in volleyball again, it's not a surprise.
And they're doing it in cross country. It's kind of funny how that is.
Well, all you can say is, okay, so what about the gene pool from the early pioneers?
I have no idea.
Well, we're both.
How about the later pioneers?
Over our skis. Well, the later pioneers had to the gene pool, I guess.
Well, you went early. You kind of went redundant there.
Yeah, okay. DJ PK, we are joined now by David Nixon, former BYU linebacker. David, good morning.
Hey, guys. What's going on?
Well, we're just sitting here trying to figure out BYU football, and we thought, who's been around BYU football, knows BYU football, and can break the code for us a little bit? The name David Nixon came out.
There you go. I'm your guy. Let's do this thing.
Well, let's just start with a quarterback because everybody always starts with a quarterback. They were starting with a quarterback at BYU long before you showed up. It happened while you were there, and it's still happening now that you've moved on. So when you hear all the talk from the coaches about the quarterback, can you break the code, what they say and what they really mean?
I think what they mean is that the team will ultimately decide. I like Aaron Roderick's piece last week where he said, I'm not going to be really the one that makes the decision. It's going to be the team. And I've been in those situations. I mean, the guys will naturally gravitate towards the starting quarterback. They know who the guy is that's out there, avoiding mistakes, leading the team, leading the charge, being the captain. Defensively, as a linebacker, I would know which guys are trying to force the ball into tight windows that shouldn't be forced. I watch our guys pick them off and say, man, that guy's not ready to play. because ultimately the defense, you got to rally around your quarterback, right? I mean, in the game of football, quarterbacks basically run the entire team. You live and die by your quarterback. And so, the players themselves, they'll kind of be the ones that decide. Obviously, the coaches are watching the film, but the players at this point, I guarantee you know who that guy should be. And of course, Kalani's known for kind of keeping things tight to his vest, so we probably won't get it announced for a little while more. But I think at this point in camp, the players know who they want to be that senior captain, kind of lead them out in game one here in a couple weeks.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you, David, because you've been in these situations many, many times at all levels, literally all levels of football. And after the spring ball, and I know Bohannon wasn't completely healthy, but you had summer workouts. You have 3+ weeks of training camp here now. And so you just answered the question that they've got to know at this point, and whether they want to release it, it's up to them. They chose not to release it after practice on Monday, and now they don't have any immediate availability scheduled this rest of the week. We'll see what they do, and then they'll say on Monday when Kalani talks as get into game week preparation, maybe they'll announce at that point. But I'm going to take them at their word in terms of I believe that they know, but also I believe that it's been a really, really close call. So I'll take them at their word that it's been a hard decision in terms of dealing from a position of strength, meaning both guys have had their moments and both have looked good and both could do the job. So I'll buy that. I'm wondering, with it being so close, does that maybe cause not necessarily a division, but there might be some guys who think, well, why didn't we go with player A? Why are we going with player B? You think it's still, in this situation, when it's this close, that it would still be apparent, widespread throughout the team, who it should be?
I don't think so. I honestly do think that, well, first of all, you go back and look at the last, decade, it feels like. BYU every single year has had to have a backup quarterback ready to play.
Right.
And so I think all the players recognize that, and they've been through it already, including last year with Keaton Slovis and then with Jake coming in later in the season. So they know that, hey, listen, even with this being such a tight battle, there's a good chance we're going to have to rely on the second string at some point. So these reps he's getting right now, whichever guy it is, are crucial reps for him to continue to develop as well. And so I think everyone, once again, knows who the guy is. It starts to become more and more apparent. They're taking more than one reps, and it starts to divide itself. But, I'm sure that this team's ready to rally around either guy. I mean, you've heard the reports of Jake not throwing a pick in spring ball, and, it kind of was going back and forth, kind of teeter-tot this fall ball where, Gary would take the lead, and all of a sudden Jake would have a great day. It's kind of gone back and forth, which, by the way, that's what you want. You want competition, right? I mean, you want those guys to have to push each other, not just be able to go out there and know it's my job and I'm just going to come out here today and just kind of take a day off. You love the fact that every day they've got to be on edge, those quarterbacks, and stay mentally sharp. And so I think this has been the best case scenario for BYU to have two guys that are neck and neck pushing each other and getting prepared for this game opener. Because it's, at the end of the day, like I said, it's going to probably take both quarterbacks this year. And I think there's probably going to be packages. If it is Gary, there's going to be packages for Jake to come into the game and run some wildcat type plays where he gets out and get him out of the pocket, get him running, because he's obviously very capable with his legs. So you're going to have both quarterbacks in these reps right now where you're splitting up the reps and having them both kind of run with the ones and get accustomed to throwing to those number one receivers. Those are huge.
As a guy who played a position where you had to hit in practice, it wasn't a game, but it was pretty close. Do you always trust the quarterback competitions when there's a whistle anytime someone gets close enough to touch him? And do you really find out who, as he's getting hit, is going to throw the ball up for grabs and who can still make a play as he's getting hit and who's going to fumble when he gets hit and who's going to hold on? I mean, how much do you trust what you see in practice with a quarterback because his rules are so different?
Listen, I still think we should be able to hit quarterbacks every play. Let's be honest. I mean, they should never be off limits. No, you want to protect those guys because obviously, like I said earlier, that you live and die by your quarterback. But it's a great question. I mean, you look at last year when Jake was in there. He was young. He made some young mistakes. Tried to force the ball in an area that definitely shouldn't be forced, and it costs BYU a few games. And so people make different decisions whenever, like you said, you got a big D tackle, 300-pounder bearing down on you. And you might break your collarbone if he lands on you, and you're going to try and force the ball or get it out too early and make a mistake. So it's a real worry. But at the same time, these guys are in college. It's the same thing when people mention about tackling for defense. Like, you guys don't tackle for the first couple of weeks. How does that affect you? I kind of always tell people at that level, you know how to tackle. I mean, it's your job at that point to know how to tackle, and so you don't need a ton of live reps per se. But quarterback's a little bit different. I mean, it's like I said, it's decision making in that split second of when you're about to get hit and when you're not about to, and keeping them away from defenders and not letting them get hit. Sometimes maybe it's a detriment, but all in all, those guys are smart enough. They know how to handle it, especially a guy like Gary that's been around for a long time, right? I mean, he's seen a lot of defenses. He's been under a lot of pressure, so him and his experience is something you can kind of rely on.
As you got older at BYU, you were a leader on the defense, and I'm wondering, you need the quarterback to play well, obviously, to win games, and that's the objective. Everybody's happy when they win. When the decision is known through the team, do you think as a defensive player, whoever doesn't win the job, that in the immediacy, it's a blow, knowing that, hey, you still got to have your same intensity because we're going to need you. Do you think as a defensive player, some of the leaders might want to go to that guy who doesn't win and say, the proverbial keep your head up because we're going to need you here at some point and you're going to have to come through for all of us?
Well, 100%. And once again, I mean, assuming say it is Gary, right? Jake's been in the same position last year with Keaton Slovis. And so for him, it's something that's a kind of familiar kind of scenario where he knows that he's the backup and hopefully the guys rally around him. But also the guys know that, hey, once again, we might need this guy. I mean, it's this football, the sports, it's a brutal game. I mean, Utah experienced with Cam Rising a couple of years ago. I mean, quarterbacks get knocked out all the time. And so you got to have that backup prepared. And honestly, you almost pay more attention to the backup because you don't want them to just go into meetings and kind of take a lackadaisical approach. You need them focused. And you need them ready for any minute they can be thrust in that starting role and the guy come and perform. And so, yeah, I'd almost say you take extra care with the backup to kind of put your arm around him and reassure him that, hey, we're going to need you at some point, so be ready. Don't just, slump your head and go through the motions from here on out. Maybe even get sharper with your skills. And listen, we've seen it too, where not only because of injury, but because of performance, guys get benched. And so, that backup spot, that quarterback backup spot, you got to be ready because you can be thrust in any moment. You get a couple turnovers, a couple bad throws, and you need a different look, and boom, you're in the game. So that's definitely a spot where you got to be prepared mentally every week to be the guy.
How much of a sense do you have that the team could be more ready for Big 12 play now that they've been through it for a year and they've gone to 2-7, have a chip on their shoulder versus last year when it was all brand new? How much does that matter, you think?
I think it's huge. I mean, listen, the independent schedule was so odd in the sense that you had to front load the schedule because other teams got into their conference play, and then all of a sudden the back end was kind of cupcakes, right? Now with Big 12, it's the opposite. You've got to kind of ramp into the season, and you got to be able to sustain that throughout the entire season. There's no gimmies. After week 3, you're boom right into conference play, and so. I think last year, understanding what it takes to finish, BYU did not do a great job of finishing, obviously, a 5-game losing streak to finish the season. And so they've got to find a way to compete this year all the way to the end. And we're talking all the way to the end of the games, but most importantly, all the way to the end of the season. And the fact that BYU, all they needed was one more win out of those 5 to get the bowl eligibility, and they couldn't pull it out. I mean, that says something about this team. And so they've got to find a way this year to finish it out and like I said, finish games and finish the season. And I guarantee that's something that Kalani's been harping throughout the offseason. They've got to find a way to compete better. And so I think last year, the experience, knowing that you can't just walk in. I mean, there's no Utah Techs or, Southern Utahs on the schedule late in November. They're all conference games, and they're all obviously super important. So understanding that and having those guys that have been through it. And, hey, and remember, it was a really young team last year. And you bring back all those guys that were young. You bring back all the guys like Micah Harper that were injured last year that are now back. And this team's got a lot of experience, and they've got a lot of, from a age perspective as far as juniors and seniors. But they also have a lot of freshmen, sophomores that were thrust into starting positions last year because of injuries that are also coming back. So you get a really interesting dynamic with this team where you got senior leadership, but you also got youngsters who have had significant playing time. And you combine all that together. I think people are sleeping on BYU. I mean, Vegas 4.5 wins. I think when you take into consideration what I was just talked about with experience, I think BYU could have an interesting season. I'm not saying they're going to go win 10 games per se, but I think they could go out there and shock a lot of people.
You talk about hitting the quarterbacks, and that wasn't good enough last season. How do you think it's going to be this year?
Yeah, I think Jay Hill kind of really took a moment this offseason and kind of did some self-reflection and realized it's just not going to get done. BYU is one of the worst in the country at sacking the quarterback, as you alluded to. And they've got to get after him. And whether that's personnel and switch around some personnel or some scheme. I mean, you got to dial out some blitzes. You got to put your guys in the best positions possible to get after the quarterback. And I guarantee you they did self-scout this offseason, like I said, and Jay realized that it's not going to cut it. And in football, those sacks, I mean, there's a couple things that go along with sacks and defense to get after. First of all, of course, the obvious, which is now you put the offense in a second and long or third and long situation, and now you limit their playbook. But the biggest thing I think is for the morale of the defense. I mean, defensive players, that's what you live for, are sacks, right? I mean, that's the stat that everyone cares about. And whenever you're struggling to get the quarterback and you can't get home, you can't get to the quarterback, it's discouraging for those defenders. And so I think Jay Hill realizes in order to keep his guys motivated, you've got to find ways to put them in successful positions to get back there and put some pressure. And so I'll also add that BYU with the secondary they've got that's shaping up to look like maybe one of the best secondaries they've had in quite a while. It should buy those the defensive linemen some time and those linebackers some time to get home, because I think you're going to have some studs there on the back end that'll be able to lock up the receivers and allow that split second for those D linemen to get there. So there's a lot of things that go into play, but BYU, no question, they've got to improve there in the rush and in the defensive rush game.
What bothered you more, that the inability to rush the quarterback, or the fact that BYU ranked 109th against the run?
Honestly, for me, it was the run. Because the thing about the run game, I mean, you go back to like West Virginia, Iowa State, that's just demoralizing in the sense that they're going to run the ball, and you line up and they still run the exact same play time and time again, and they're gashing you for 5, 7, 10, 15 yards. And I mean, I've been there, done that. I remember my freshman year we played Boise State, and they probably ran against us for that many yards too. And I remember Colorado State too. It was brutal. And it's tough because you almost have no answers. Every time you line up, they're just down block, kick out, and there goes the running back. And the scheme's just not set up, and the guys aren't executing. And it's bad. And that was something that was very glaring too. I mean, that West Virginia game, they just crammed it down BYU's throat. And that's one of those things where football is kind of obviously a kind of a masculine, kind of macho type sport. And when you have teams like that, they're just going to cram it down your throat. It's deflating when you line up and they just keep pounding the rock and you can't stop them. So for me, for sure, the run game, BYU's inability to stop the run last year was very glaring. And once again, that goes to very young linebackers, young D line. I mean, Batty, John Nelson, all those guys were hurt and injured. But also scheme wise, I mean, I've talked about in the past where BYU was going with what they call a wrong arm technique, where they're trying to spill it. And I just didn't think BYU had the horses to do that. Later in the season, they switched it to more of a force technique, and it started to get a little better. But they've got to get that dialed in this year, because obviously teams are going to go back and watch the film from last year and continue to try to exploit that from BYU's defense. And they've got to find a way to stop early, because you've got to make a team one-dimensional. I mean, if they can run the ball, that sets up the play action, and the next thing you know, your safeties are up in the box and they're dumping over the top. It's bad. When teams can run the ball, it's going to be a long day.
I remember those horrific weeknight games against Boise State and Colorado State. You didn't have to bring them up again. Those were bad memories for everybody involved. But obviously,
very, very bad. I still have nightmares about those two games.
Yeah.
And here's the thing. Here's the thing, PK. That was a different time. That was freshman year. BYU was running a 3-3-5, so you're definitely more susceptible to the run game. I mean, you've got 5 DBs on the field, right? I mean, it's that defense wasn't designed to stop the run. And so scheme-wise, and it kind of goes to what we're talking about with this current team, scheme-wise, you've got to tweak it, and you've got to go into games with a different type of scheme to handle it. But it's easier said than done, right? I mean, it's tough to have defenders switch their mindset from a certain technique to a new technique each week, back and forth. And so I think that's where they've got to come up with a solid kind of game plan and scheme to be able to stop the run, because like I said, teams are going to continue to try it. until BYU can prove they can shut it down.
So I've seen you, David, hit the golf ball. Who's longer off the tee, you or your brother-in-law Taysom?
Oh, man. I unfortunately have to give it to Taysom. The kid hits it like 330, 340. And the funny thing is he does it with like a 2-iron. He has like a driving iron that hits like 300 plus. And it doesn't make sense. I tell him the only time I'll wager some friendly money is when he uses a driver, because that gets a little squirrely. But the kid, I mean, he's just a freak athlete. And you saw it in the preseason game this last week. I mean, they lined him up at tailback. They lined him up at fullback. They lined him up as tight end. I mean, they flanked him out and put him like a slot. They're moving him all over the place, and he's pretty excited. I mean, the Kubiak addition at OC has been huge. I know it's kind of given some kind of renewed energy going into the season, because I think they're going to continue to utilize him. I mean, as we saw in the preseason game, in all sorts of different positions. So he's pretty pumped.
When you talk about that money, man, I mean, for every $1 that you give out, he ought to be giving you $5. This guy's just loaded, man, isn't he?
Yeah, we always have to weigh it, we make sure it's a fair distribution here. He's doing well. I mean, for sure. Obviously, he's had a great career so far, and the thing that has been great, stayed healthy.
Yeah.
And I think that's been the biggest thing is, you're going to get bumps and bruises, and man, he gets beat up, especially that position he's in. But fortunately, he's been able to finish the seasons and go out there and perform. And so, staying healthy is the main thing at this point in his career. But it's almost like he's getting better and better. I mean, he's strong as an ox, and it was fun. I mean, you guys probably have talked about it in the show, but it was fun watching him there with Jamal, kind of lead blocking for Jamal a couple times in that game.
For sure. That's what it was.
He went through the hole and stood a linebacker up, and I mean, the linebacker was just like, he went right down to 0 miles per hour. He wasn't going anywhere, and Jamal flashed by for 20 yards or whatever.
I did text him after the game. I said, "There's no way in chance you would have blocked me like that." By the way, and I let him know. I let him know that I would have eaten his lunch. But it's pretty impressive. And frankly, I think that's why the OC Kubiak just sits there and says, "Man, I can put this guy in all sorts of different positions. He can be a quarterback. He can throw the ball if I need him to, and I can lead him up in the hole and seal the linebacker. And he does his job. And so, there were a couple of plays I gave him a hard time about. He was cutting the defensive end and kind of chopping him a little bit. But that's what he's got to do. That's what they're calling him to do is take on DNs, take on backers, line up, throw the ball maybe, run the ball. I mean, we were talking about during fall camp. I mean, he's got to memorize like 4 different type of playbooks. I mean, there's a lot that goes into that and learning all the different positions and where to line up in every single call. And so it's a lot on his plate, but he's having a blast.
David, we appreciate a few minutes. Thanks for joining us. It won't be long. Games are here soon.
Oh, man, it can't come soon enough. Always fun, guys. Appreciate it.
David Nixon, former Cougar great, join us right here on 97.5 The Zone. Coming up next, Trroy Renck, Denver Post sports columnist. Multiple stories with him, PK. CU football, how good will Deion have the Buffs in year 2 of Coach Prime's reign? And then how many Utes and Cougars are going to be on that Bronco roster? They got a lot of guys who played college football here in the Beehive State. Right now, we are joined by Adam Jackson from Beehive Meals. And Adam, we've talked about your ability to prepare meals at a reasonable price for families on the go. And also, you've got to deal with Utah, BYU, and Utah State athletics. You're working with athletic departments there. But you're also working on something that you're pretty excited about with that'll work for college students.
Yeah. And we've gone over the economics that we're a cheap or at least an easy option when it comes to the economics. We're looking at about $3 to $4 per serving. I mean, let me ask you guys, when you guys were college students, were you rolling in the money back then? Like, what were you guys doing?
I'm not rolling in the money now.
I actually, when we were talking about this off the air, I thought of a specific story. Before I was in college, I was in high school, and in those days, it wasn't online, right? Everything's in this catalog. It's literally a big book. And I'm like, wow, there's dorms on campus, off campus, apartments. And my mom immediately, oh, you're not living in an apartment and shopping for your own. You won't shop for your own food. You won't eat the right meals. You'll get sick, and then you'll flunk out. I mean, I'm sitting on the couch. She already flunked me out of school. And that's what happened. No, she said you're going to live in the dorm and you're going to go to the dining commons and eat. And, so that was what happened right there. So when you mentioned that, there are lots of parents thinking, man, my kid's in an apartment for the first time. What are they eating?
Yeah, most people in the community know us as a family-friendly option. where, we're chasing busy parents. Busy moms are our biggest demographic when it comes to who purchases our meals. But if you really understand, like, our meals to the core, like, it's a very easy, very convenient option. We make cooking easy. So, my wife is the one that founded the company. She is the cook in our home, but our meals are easy enough that I can handle them, as the husband. They're easy.
I can handle them, so they're easy because I've seen them and I could do it.
Mm-hmm. And so you think life skills. When you're on your own for the very first time, you may not know how to cook for the very first time, right? Like, at least I didn't when I, was going through college. I probably ate out way too much, which from an economic standpoint probably wasn't the best on my
Not that
my
time
wallet.
of life.
And so we make it an easy option, and then we're going to save, the college student money, especially if they take it from the standpoint that they view their roommates as family, which can be hard sometimes, I guess.
Yeah.
But if you share some of the meals, because we do have the bigger portions you go, the cheaper it gets. So we have 3 different sizes, from a small, which is 3 to 4 servings, a regular, which is 5 to 6, and the bigger portion. The bigger portion actually is the most efficient when it comes to price per serving.
Yeah.
And so if you spread that out between your roommates, it can be super economical for you.
If people want to get a hold of you, what should they do?
We are an e-commerce company, so beehivemeals.com. We make it straightforward. Just purchase online, and then we will deliver. We'll do all the prep, and then bring it straight to your house.
Beehivemeals.com. And for today, if you mention the Zone, you get $12.80 off your next order. That's about a free meal for a family of 4. That's about half a week for a college student right there. Mention the Zone, and get $12.80 off your next order at beehivemeals.com. Thanks a lot.
Okay, thank you.
This is Jake Scott and Ben Anderson.
There's a different feeling on campus at BYU right now with the football team. I sense a difficulty turning a corner, at least this year, because you're not talking about a young quarterback at this point. I don't see what you do this year that launches into future seasons of BYU being on this significant upward trajectory, especially when so often our conversation has been like, can you win 6 games? 6 games at BYU absolutely has to be the standard. It's a great football program historically. 6 wins cannot be the bar.
Yeah,
they're
they're not below 6 wins all that often in their history.
I hope it's not just this weird dead season. It just feels like a little bit of a dead season that we're going to bookend on both sides and say it has nothing to do with the future and nothing to do with the past.
Hear Jake Scott and Ben Anderson every day from 10 to noon on 97.5 The KSL Sports Zone.
DJ and PK, it's 97.5 The Zone. We're joined by Trroy Renck, Denver Post sports columnist. Trroy, good morning.
Morning, guys. Thanks for having me on.
Well, thanks for coming on. There are so many storylines tying Utah and Colorado together right now. We'll start with the Big 12, and then we'll get to the Broncos. It's year 2. Ute and Cougar fans are curious, how good is Colorado? Coach Prime, he wins press conferences. How many games can he win, you think?
Yeah, he lost his last couple press conferences.
Yeah,
but
I was going to say that, yeah.
They will be improved. I mean, they won 4 games last year, start out 3-0, and then lose 8 of their final 9 in a couple of embarrassing fashion, including at Washington State. The issue, they're skill position players. They can match up with anybody in the league, really, with Shedeur Sanders, Travis Hunter, Jimmy Horn. I mean, they've got – and that Dallin Hayden, the kid they got from Ohio State at running back. They've got pieces in the backfield and wide that you love. And obviously Shedeur Sanders and Hunter are Heisman Trophy candidates, at least early in the season. The team's going to have to win way more than they did for that to come to fruition. But the reality is the questions start up front at the line of scrimmage on both sides of the ball. They've reshaped their offensive line. They get one of the top tackles in the country from high school in Jordan Seaton. But the problem with offensive lines is it usually takes a little bit to coalesce, and the chemistry is a necessary component at that position. And I'm not sure they're there yet. They're definitely improved. The talent level improved, but can they be better? Shedeur Sanders got sacked, 52 times last year? That number's got to come down to like 25 for them to have the season they want. And defensively, they've got a couple of better defensive linemen, but there's just still concerns. Can they slow the run? You know, Warren Sapp said the other day he's their new D-line coach and along that line, and that they're going to be way better against the run. And if that's the case, then their season will be better. But can they run the football and slow the run to have more balance? That's what we all want to see. But for me, I have them picked to go 6-6, so they'll be better. But I don't know that they're going to be significantly better until I see the defensive line play in a real game, or at least 2 or 3 real games.
6-6. Do you believe, brother? Do you believe? Are you a believer?
Yeah, I'm not on that train yet. Now, they're fun to watch offensively at times. We got to see more. And that's just Deion is amazing at recruiting skill position guys. There's no question. It's harder to recruit offensive line, and they're living in the portal to do it. And the reality is a lot of those guys are available in the portal because they were just very ordinary, or in some cases not very good. But so we'll see. But that's, for me, it all starts at the line of scrimmage. If they're going to have that 8, 9, even some people talking 10-win season, I got to see that. And the other thing is, given the issues the program's had over the last 20 years, and I'm an alum, so I watch almost all their games. If you're going to have a special season, you got to start winning on the road. And that's where it gets tricky for me. Again, they beat TCU, and that was easily their most impressive win of the season. Unfortunately, it was their first game of the season. But if you're going to be this type of team people are talking about in November, can you start winning on the road? And it's an easier schedule, certainly, than the Pac-12 was last year. But those are the questions they've got to answer. You can't just say we're going to be great when your road record the last 20 years has been among the worst in college football. You got to go prove it.
And then there are the Denver Broncos. We got former Cougar at quarterback in Zach Wilson. We got Utes pretty much all over the field on that team. Some new, some have been there for a while. I guess start with quarterbacks. Are they going to keep 3? What are the odds Zach's going to end up on that roster?
I think he is going to make it. He's had his last game wasn't great, but the last 2.5 weeks or so, he's gained real traction. Sean Payton has an affinity for him. The reality was he was going to be their starter had they not been able to draft Bo Nix. They acquired him. It took months to acquire, to bring the money down to $2.75 million for the season, and he was their insurance. If a team came up and took Bo Nix, the Broncos probably take a non-quarterback then in the first round, and then they roll with Zach Wilson. But obviously when Nick shows up, Wilson's situation changes dramatically. But I don't think he would slip through waivers. They like him enough. It's a luxury to keep 3 quarterbacks, especially with the new dynamic kickoff rule and needing more tacklers at times on the roster. But I think he makes it. Now, I think they start with 3 on the 53. I don't know that they necessarily finish there. I don't think they will, but I believe Zach Wilson's done enough to make the roster. He's been rejuvenated here. It's been a little bit of football rehab for him. So, hopefully for Zach, after a year here, he goes out and finds a good opportunity. I think he's probably going to get one more shot in the league to start, but obviously it's not going to be here.
So is he the 2 or the 3 then?
I think he opens as the 3. I think at some point he'll move in to be the 2 during the season, is my guess. It's hard to do during the season because the reps go way down, but I do think there's a chance he becomes the 2. But to start the season, he will start as the 3.
He could be thrown to a couple of Utes. Tim Patrick is coming back from a couple of injury-plagued years. He's now 30. He just scored a touchdown. And then there's Devon Vele, who's brand new, just making the move. Is he going to make it as a rookie? Do you think there'll be 2 Utes in that receiver group?
Yeah, Tim Patrick's a great story. He missed the last 2 years with a torn ACL and then a torn Achilles, both basically on the first day of camp. So he had caught a touchdown in like 1,000 days. And as you guys know from his time in Utah, this guy's an absolute gamer, a grinder. He sets the heartbeat and the kind of the attitude of the receiver room. Players love him. They want him to make it. They want him to succeed. As Sean Payton said, with him coming back from these injuries, you don't have to see it every day, but you got to see it. They weren't seeing it enough early in camp, and it put him on the bubble. I believe he made the team with this past preseason game, especially because they're able to line him up in the slot, which he really hasn't done, but he's able to use his size advantage. So I see Tim on the team making it. And Vele has been the surprise of camp as a 7th rounder. Now, obviously, he's an older guy, but his maturity shows up, and you guys would know this from watching their games in Utah. His maturity shows up in his route running, his coachability, his attention to detail. He plays like a veteran. And I can't see a scenario where he doesn't make it. Now, things always get tricky at the end with 53. If there's an injury and they have to keep an extra guy, and I'm pretty sure Vele would be able to get through to the practice squad. But for me, he's been their third best receiver at times throughout camp. He got banged up a little bit last week, so that slowed him. But I believe he makes it as well. And Troy Franklin, the kid from from Oregon, he has not had a good camp, but I don't believe they will move on from him as a fourth-round pick. But Vele and Patrick make it, and Cody Barton, as we sit here today, is going to be the starting inside linebacker. So, and Garrett Bowles, another Ute, will be at left tackle. So a big presence of Utah. I talked to Kyle Whittingham about that at the Big 12 days. He's a huge Broncos fan because they had 7 guys in camp from Utah. And I didn't realize Whittingham played for the Denver Gold back in the day, so he's got a little bit of an affinity for the Denver area alone. So a lot of reason to watch Broncos if you're from Utah.
Yeah, we had, as far as the NIL deal, we had Devon Vele on each week last season. And, boy, he really brought it. He brought it strong, and he was available. He didn't duck us. You know, they didn't have the season that they wanted. But him being one of the seniors, or I guess he was a junior, but old senior in terms of experience on the team and tenure, that he was a stand-up dude, and he got better as the quarterback issue, as you probably remember, with Cam Rising was all scattered. And once they got done with that, and he was developing a relationship with Barnes, the quarterback, he ended up putting up some big numbers. So I think that you can make an argument with him, and maybe you've seen this, that even though he's older a little bit, he came to Utah as a walk-on, that he's sort of just scratching the surface of what he can become.
Yeah, and that's what they're hoping. The problem with the NFL, and it was less an issue with Bulls because he's a first-rounder, but when you come in at this age, like Lamar Jackson's only like 1 year older than Vele, and he's entering like his 8th season. I mean, it's a weird dynamic when you enter in that 26, 27 range. That's where guys are kind of in their prime of their career, so the clock is ticking on him. And when I talk to Devon, he's on one of my most recent podcasts. He admits it. My age. It's one of the reasons he got drafted later at 7th, despite his athletic skills, is that, hey, you got to come in and be ready now. And that's hard for young receivers because the scheme is so much different. But to your point about his accountability and being available and understanding the responsibility, when I talked to him, he said the best thing he ever did was go on his mission to Samoa after high school. He had no offers out of school. And he was just like, he felt like the best thing for him was to go there because most skill position guys don't go on missions for that reason. It hurts your draft stock. And he did. And then he comes back to Utah and still has to walk on. But he told me the way I knew I'd be able to move up the depth chart is do everything better in terms of the details, not tell coaches, well, this is how I do it and this is what I do. And he caught on that way. And you guys saw that. And he did tell me, and I watched Utah football because of the Pac-12. He's like, yeah, I mean, it wasn't a great year in terms of the quarterback position, but he said as a leader in the room, I had to work with these young guys to make them better. And while his stats suffered the first part of the season, he's like, by the end of, as you talked about, by the end of the year, he felt like they were starting to really gain rhythm together. And he took satisfaction in that as a leader, that he was part of that, hey, I could have just thrown my hands up in the air. Man, this is a terrible way for me to enter the draft. And instead, he made it about the team. And all of those characteristics have been on display at camp. It's why I think he's a lock to make it.
Are the Broncos going to have a winning record? Is that too much to ask for them? If you get to a winning record these days, that puts you right at the edge of the playoffs.
Yeah, I don't see that. I do see, most sports books have them at 5.5. I see the over. I pick them to be 6-11. I think there's a real path to 7-10. After that, I don't know. I mean, they're young, they're hungry, they're in a much better position than they were last year. Sean Payton's loving coaching this team, not being, kind of held hostage by Russell Wilson in terms of the offense he wanted to run. They just did not get along, professionally. And then at the end, personally, it just was a relationship that had soured. And you can just see how much Sean Payton loves coaching this team, but nobody's given him much of a chance. And a lot of it starts on offense because you look at their skill position players. And I tell people all the time, when you're so high on the Broncos, who on this team do you take on your fantasy league team? Maybe Sutton. I mean, that's the issue. Now, again, someone like Vele, by the end of the year, we're like, man, he's got 40 catches and 500 yards and 4 touchdowns. We didn't see that coming. Or Greg Dulcich, the tight end, finally stays healthy. And Javonte Williams, year 2 removed from ACL surgery, is showing burst, so he's better. But I don't see them as much more than a 6-7 win team. But they're well coached. They have the proverbial chip on their shoulder. It's just they're in the AFC. I mean, you got to play the Chiefs twice. You got to play the Chargers now twice. They're not a pushover. They've lost 8 straight to the Raiders. And then you play Baltimore on the road. Like their schedule, if they don't get off to a fast start, they got no chance to have a winning record. Those first 8 games, and realistically, they need to go like 4-4 to give themselves a chance to surprise people. But they are a team they're all rallying around the idea that we're going to be young, tough, smart. It's got a kind of a collegiate vibe to it. So I like that. It's just the NFL is different. I mean, at the end of the day, there's a real issue of talent, and some of these guys that are young have got to step up for them to surprise people.
And getting back to Deion, that thing a couple weeks ago, and especially with the CBS dude who had nothing to do with whatever his beef was, and then, calling out one of your colleagues there. He's negative. Well, yeah. I mean, if you grew up in journalism, that's the way the job is supposed to be half the time anyway. So I would have said, yeah, that's how I'm employed. But he handled it the way he handled it. I thought it was so stupid for Sanders to make an issue out of all that stuff. I'm wondering, does he just want to have with the intention of nobody believes in us versus the world type mentality? What do you think is the motivation there?
Well, I mean, Deion as a coach is much like Deion the player. I mean, I covered Deion the player when he's with the Cowboys for a little bit. I've been around him as a player. I don't see much different as a coach, which as a player, if you kind of spar with the media and go at it and talk, it's just part of it. But as a coach, you're representing the university. You're the highest paid employee in the state. There's a responsibility for me that's a little different, that you have to understand that, these questions you have to answer them as the head football coach. And they're not, this isn't Woodward and Bernstein. This is just football stuff about, why do you struggle here? What's going to happen here? It just feels like with Deion, that it's not an us against them. It's either you're on his side or you're not. He doesn't see the media in a traditional sense that when you cover them and they're good, you write they're good. When you cover them and they're bad, you write they're bad. And in his case, it feels like, and I've only written about 5 columns since I've returned to the Post about Deion. I've been to, I think, 3 or 4 pressers now with him. It just feels like to me, either you're on his side or you're not. And that's not journalism. We're not on your side. The whole idea is at the end of the year, you come up to me and say, hey, I thought your coverage was fair. There's going to be things you don't like. There should be things you do like. But my job isn't to promote you and be on your side. And that's where it gets a little complicated. I mean, college sports in general have kind of, shaded that way more over the last decade. But in Boulder, it's just that's kind of the vibe. And listen, here's the deal. If he goes out and wins, he's the one that makes sense of all. He backs up all this talk. He can kind of do what he wants. It feels like he answers to no one. But they got to win. You can't keep acting like this and be 4-8. Like, you can't keep acting like you're Alabama, you're Georgia, you're Ohio State. You got to win. And that's where kind of those of us who went to school at CU when they were really good in the 90s, it's like, yeah, it's been great. CU's back on the map. They're a conversation. They were terrible before he got there. For me, maybe the worst team in D1. But he's talked the game to the point now, you've got to go win. And that's what my issue is. They don't need Coach Prime. They need an elite coach. Can he coach? That's what I want to see this year. As much as we talk about the O-line and D-line and are they going to be better up front, can he coach better? Because he did not have a good year on game day last year. He did not. For me, he was responsible for at least 2 losses, if not 3, to Stanford, Oregon State, and Arizona by just decisions made from the coaching staff, which starts with him.
Trroy, we appreciate the time and all the opinions. Thanks for joining us and talking to the Utes and the Cougar fans in the crowd and the Bronco fans.
Yeah, you got it, guys. Yeah. Have a great season.
Trroy Renck, Denver Post sports columnist, joining us right here on The Zone. DJ and PK, it's 97.5 The Zone.
Ladies and gentlemen, may I present...
This is JJ and Alex.
6 SEC teams against 6 Big Ten teams, which I know is not possible. I'm just saying, if that were... Right. If that were the case, that actually would probably be the most intriguing from a TV interest standpoint. And I think that the G5 invite becomes like, isn't that cute? Well, we've always liked these storylines. Utah 2004 and 2008. Boise State being the BCS Busters. That's so fun for you guys. Just don't be a part of our national championship. Get the hell out of here.
Just don't win that game.
Just don't show up
don't
for
win
that.
5-12 game.
Yeah, if you win your first round game, then you know what you have to do. You have to lose in that second round at the very least.
Catch JJ and Alex afternoons from 3 to 6. Presented by G2G Bars on 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone.
The Utah County Player of the Week Award sent weekly to the top high school athlete from Utah County during the prep football season, and this week's winner is Timview High School wide receiver Jaron Pula, who helped the Thunderbirds rally to beat Skyridge 33-29 in their season opener Thursday. Pula finished with a game-high 9 catches for 115 yards and 2 touchdowns, hauling in a game-winning pass from Carson Rasmussen with 6 seconds left in the game to win it. DJ and PK, it's 97.5 The Zone. We just had on a Denver Sports Post columnist, Trroy Renck, who had plenty of opinions on CU football and the Denver Broncos. And him catch your ear?
Cody Barton's going to be starting at linebacker. He's had a nice career for himself and should be able to have success there. That's it. He's on his third team, and to find his way to be a starter on his third team, I think is super cool. I've said this many, many times. He's a testament to sticking it out. Injured in high school a lot, and took him a while to get going there at Utah, in and out of the lineup. Got there as a senior. Ended up being drafted in the third round by Seattle, I think it was. Well, I know it was Seattle, but I think it was the third round. I'm like 99% sure it was. And made that team and then moved on to Washington, and now here with the Broncos and still in the league. I mean, that's just awesome. 27 years old. I just looked it up. Yeah, but it is the third round. He was drafted in 2019, so he's beating the odds there. That's great. Bowles was going to be an established player from day one. I mean, when the Utes got him, they knew he was plugged right in. He was a JC kid and went about his business. Yeah.
His path was clear.
Yeah.
And he has traveled the path as expected.
Right. Yeah. So that's a story that was an All-American and all that, and has fulfilled it. And the Devon Vele story is just a great, great story, man. Walk on, no offers, go on a mission to do his thing. And you could see, as we talked to him, that he was a mature kid, a leader. And I think teams like that type of stuff. And Zach Wilson, man, he's just been battered, bruised, but he's still standing. You know, a long way to go, but he's still standing. And then the Deion thing there, I don't know that I see anything there beyond the circus atmosphere. I don't root against the guy. I don't necessarily root for him, but I certainly don't root against him. And you wonder, it was such a splash, but this job is about grinding. It's not about a splash. Has there ever been a celebrity coach who just made it? And they can become celebrities as they win. But has there been a coach who was a celebrity before being a coach? He was a celebrity probably of the highest order. And does that lead to being a good coach? You have any examples? They become celebrities in various sports. You know, Steve Kerr here, he's running his mouth last night, doing his thing. He's a celebrity now. Well, he really wasn't a celebrity to the level he was or is before he got to be a coach. And now people want to hear what he has to say. So he's elevated his celebrity status. Thank you, Steph and Clay and all those guys that helped him get there. But can you think of anybody who was a celebrity and then became a coach? Urban Meyer was a celebrity and then went to Jacksonville, and it was a big old bomb. Stunk.
I think that the celebrity coach hasn't worked for a long time. in football. In basketball, maybe there's a few more examples. We could go over some of them, I guess, in the next segment. We're running out of time here. In football, when I was a kid, Bart Starr got the Packers job. Now, I'm not old enough to remember Bart Starr as a player, but they won 5 NFL championships with him. He was a celebrity coach, and they gave him like a decade because they did not want to fire Bart Starr. And when they finally fired him, I read an interview with him years later where he said, I really didn't know what I was doing when I started. By the end, I thought I was starting to get the hang of it, but it was just too long and it was too late then. And I think the game's kind of gone away from that because it just doesn't work. And I think there were plenty of doubters when Deion got his first job. Now, that was at a lower level, and he won. And so he gets the second job and he starts 3-0. But I think to Trroy's point, well, 4-8, that's not going to last very long. People are going to get tired of that. People want to win. And the line of scrimmage, are you a grinder, and can you find those guys, identify and develop? We've talked about that forever. The Utes have been able to do it, so they've been able to change their position in the college football world. If CU wants to get back to who they are, they got to be way better at the line of scrimmage. And that's easier said than done. And Deion recruits skill players who are flashy, but if you keep losing the line of scrimmage, it's hard to win games.
Impossible.
DJ, PK, and Beehive Meals. Adam Jackson is in studio today. Adam, you got a lot going on. You got offers for people. You got discounts. You're working with college teams. You're working with parents and college students. You got a new thing going there. And you got the core business, which started actually before the pandemic, you were telling us, which is people are busy, don't have time to cook, trying to eat earlier, trying to do 2 things at once, and that's where Beehive Meals comes in.
Yeah, that's our specialty, is trying to make, family dinner easier for people. You talk about stories and lots of things going on. What we need to do is get my wife in here because she's the founder of the company. She has an amazing story when it comes to starting the business. We like to say that we were our first customers. We are... we've got 4 kids. We actually had our 4th child 8 weeks ago. So not only are we building a business, but we're also building a family at the same time. So we very much understand how difficult it is to basically run life and then, still take care of kids on top of that. So maybe one of those days we'll have her come in and she'll tell her kind of inspirational stories as far as how she, started Beehive Meals.
That's just freaking beautiful right there. That says it. That's what you're talking about. You got this family. You guys are busy. You're going in a million different directions. This is the point of Beehive Meals, is to make that direction, which is necessary because you got to eat, at least a couple times a day, to make it as easy as possible, and it's working. That's an awesome plan that you guys have done.
Yeah, and to go along the lines of it's working, we've luckily been able to grow a company pretty quickly. Off air, we've been able to talk about, just like so many different things, but specifically how we're growing, that we were pre-pandemic, that we started right before the pandemic and then saw our sales grow month over month for the longest while. We've been in the community for a long time, but we've been recognized as one of Utah's fastest growing companies. We were actually recognized just last week on the Inc. 5000 as one of the nation's fastest growing companies, number 399. That's something that we're really excited to announce. But here in Utah, we've been on really all the awards as far as, Fast 50 with Utah Business, or Utah 100, which is another, fastest growing company here in Utah. We've won Best of State 8 different times, but 3 of those back to back are in meal delivery. So we do have a good thing going. Not only, are we our first customers, but we've got the numbers and the credibility to show that, we've built a successful business and we can feed a lot of people at a very, high quality rate.
Right, and I am a customer. I can testify.
And as you grow over time, it seems like the key is you got to retain customers while you're adding the customers if you're going to grow the way you're talking about, and that means rotating through the meals. So every month, new meals, new flavors, new stuff.
Yep, rotating menu. We want to keep it fresh. And obviously there's favorites that we want to rotate more frequently, but we're always adding to the menu. We're always, trying to keep, a pulse on the customer, understand what they like, what they don't like. Some of our favorites this month, if I were to pull it up real quick, we've got the chicken cordon bleu, chicken tortilla soup. Maybe one thing I'll notice, so we're slow cooker meals, right? But there's something about slow cookers in fall. Football weather. I was driving in this morning and it started to feel like football, right? It was low 70 degrees. But for us, that means soup season. We have an amazing soup menu that's, just released. It'll start selling in September. But your favorites when it comes to, chicken noodle soup, or this month there's chicken tortilla soup. There's tomato basil. There's so many good things when it comes to the soup menu.
BeehiveMeals.com. You can place your order there at BeehiveMeals.com. And today, if you mention the Zone, you get $12.80 off your next order, and that's roughly a free meal for a family of 4. So mention the Zone and get $12.80 off at BeehiveMeals.com.